Hello, hello. We're here in the room, and today for discussion, trendy book that's always been a bit trendy and had its waves of being trendy and never ceases to not be in our imagination, and that is Homer's The Odyssey. Now, yes, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon and discuss The Odyssey. I will confess in my defense, I did read about a third of this book last year, and then I just stopped. I just couldn't keep going. I kind of got a bit busy and started reading other things. But now I've read about half of it. I restarted reading it about a few weeks ago, and I've read half of it, the first two books. There are 24 books in this story. And I read the first 12 books, from book 1 to book 12. The Odyssey by Homer. Now, it's very important, as with all discussions of Homer, whether it be the Odyssey or the Iliad, that we discuss the translations. These are always very important when we're discussing the Odyssey. The buzz about the Odyssey is very often the buzz in regards to the translation that's used. Now, this translation that I have been reading is T.E. Lawrence's translation, the translation of Lawrence of Arabia. And it's an interesting translation because this is a prose translation, as we see. Lawrence has converted this Homeric poem into prose. And he writes in the back, "The oldest book worth reading for its story and the first novel of Europe." That's what he says in the translator's note. Now, did he succeed in converting this into a novel? Personally, I don't think so. This is not a novel. It doesn't feel like a novel. Very much still feels like an epic. It doesn't really follow. I don't get into the same groove as I would in reading this as opposed to an actual novel. And what I equate as the actual novel, the quintessential novel, the prototype of novels, I think that's the 19th century, really, especially Dickens. Dickens is the novel, in my opinion. But obviously there are constantly writers that try to expand that format. But rather, Lawrence is kind of taking this poem. He's getting rid of the meter that the hexameter, the diclectic hexameter, this kind of 6 by 6 by what is it exactly? 6 syllables, and then a stress on the last 6. I can't remember it exactly, but there's a certain rhythm to it in these poems that Lawrence tries to eliminate by rendering it into prose. However, you do very much still feel like this is a poem that has been converted into prose. So yeah, I have jumped on the bandwagon because I do want to read books before I watch the movies. I'm not sure if I'm even going to watch the Christopher Nolan Odyssey. I'm not the biggest fan of his, but I do need to read the story. That way I can tell people, I know what I'm talking about. I know everything about Homer and the Odyssey, blah, 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 just to be a smart ass. No, but all jokes aside, I do prefer reading the books very often before watching the movies, because I don't want to have the image of Matt Damon as Odysseus stuck in my mind, and I don't imagine Matt Damon as Odysseus because I started reading the Odyssey before the Nolan trailers and all that came out. I actually was exposed to the Odyssey when I was quite young. I read a very small abridged version of it, but I can't say I remember too much from that, other than that it was very violent and that characters solve disputes very quickly using violence. That's one of the takeaways I had from a version of the Odyssey I read in middle school. It was a very small abridged version. There's no way it was the full text. It was about like 80 pages or something like that. Okay, but T.E. Lawrence's The Odyssey. Let's discuss his translation. So if any discussion with The Odyssey, as I mentioned, you have to talk about the translation. So in his translator's note, Lawrence says, among other things, I have not pored over contested readings, variants, or spurious lines. However, scholars may question the text in detail. Writers, and even would-be writers, cannot but see in the Odyssey a single authentic, unedited work of art, integrally preserved. Thrice I noted loose ends, openings, the author had forgotten. One sentence I would have shifted in time. 5 or 6 lines rang false to me. One speech seems to come before its context. These are motes in a book which is neat, close-knit, artful, and various, as nearly word-perfect as midnight oil and pumice can effect. He also says, wherever choice offered between a poor and a rich word, richness had in it to raise the color. I have transposed the order of metrical Greek, being unlike plain English. Also, I have been free with moods and tenses, allowed myself to interchange adjective and adverb, and dodged over poverty of preposition, limitations of verb, and pronominal vagueness by rearrangement. Still syntaxed apart, this is a translation. Like many translations. So this is a prose translation. Know that when you're getting into it. I can't say that Lawrence completely nails everything. I think his writing is quite nice. And it's definitely worth reading this translation, but you do lose that meter. Not that I've read it in that version before, but it's typical of translations that they try to keep, they at least render it into a poem rather than prose. Prose is much less common. As I mentioned, I haven't read any other translations of the Odyssey in English, but very popular translations now, especially there's a trendy but perhaps slightly controversial translation of Emily Wilson, and then there's also Robert Fagles' translation, which is very popular. Those are ones many people read, but I'm not going to discuss that. It's really regarding Lawrence's translation. Now Lawrence, T.E. Lawrence, as many of you may know, this is Lawrence of Arabia. He was he was a diplomat, very much a military man, an adventurer of the early 20th century. You could say he was one of these big adventurers in the world, but also he was an academic in many senses, a scholar. He spoke Latin, Arabic, Greek, I believe French as well, quite a lot of languages, and he was very learned and a very well-regarded writer. I haven't read any of his other works, but he has a text called the Pillars of Wisdom, which is quite regarded as quite a well-written work of kind of wisdom writing, philosophy, and the such. But we do get this feeling in his translation that this is perhaps a very, his writing is for the most part quite smooth. There is a sense of a bit of urgency, I would say, in his writing, something that perhaps comes out. Perhaps it's because he is a bit of a military figure himself. There is something to that it feels quite immediate, his writing. But at the same time, the nature of the Odyssey has many parts of text in which you're not sure exactly what this is talking about. This is very much recounting past events. This happens, I would say, even in reading half of this book, I would say about 70% of the book is regarding past events. And you're sometimes not completely sure the chronology of these events, when they happened. So, and I think that lends to the fact that this was an oral, these Homeric poems were passed down orally. We're not exactly sure when. We have an idea that it may have been the 8th century, but the earliest manuscripts, I'm not sure exactly when they were. Was it the 5th century? Something like that. And Homer, there are all kinds of questions regarding who he was. Was it even a man? Myth tells us that he was blind. But scholars seem to agree that the same work, the same production of the Odyssey was also produced by the same people or person that produced the Iliad. But legends and myth regarding Homer, interspersed with, I guess, archaeological findings, are all we really have to kind of give us some sort of light and semblance in this Homeric fog, we can say. But I'm not a scholar in regards to this. I'm kind of just rambling. And that's just from what I hear and read about in regards to Homer. Now, let's talk about the text now itself. What is happening in these first 12 books? Well, the beginning of the Odyssey, this is the wake of the events of the Iliad, so the Trojan War. So Odysseus was an important hero in the Trojan War. He's not the main hero, but he's an important character. He's a bit of a wily character. He's kind of clever, a bit sneaky, a bit cunning. But he has to make his way back from Troy back to Ithaca. And that's where Penelope, his wife, has been, and his son Telemachus. And he's been gone for quite some time, I think 10 years. I'm not sure exactly the amount of time, but he's been gone for a long time. And the narrative starts with essentially the gods kind of recounting what has happened in during the Trojan War vaguely, but also that Odysseus has been stranded on the island with Circe. And Circe, she wants him as her lover, and she's kind of keeping him there, keeping him hidden. However, Odysseus has provoked the wrath of Poseidon, because earlier in the narrative it is recounted that he blinds Poseidon's one of Poseidon's sons, the Cyclops, and this infuriates Poseidon, among other things, I believe. There may have also been a lack of offerings to Poseidon. All of these gods, they're quite petty, and they expect people to be giving them offerings and to be quite nice to them. And if they're not, you will feel their wrath. That goes also with the theme of Xenia, which is guest friendship or guest love, I guess, that you're supposed to be respectful to your guests because you're not sure if they may or may not be manifestations of gods. And at the start, we definitely see this with Athena. Athena is quite active, and she, I think similar in the Iliad, she's very much on Odysseus or the Greek side, although the Greeks are constantly infighting, but she very much champions Odysseus and tries to help him out. But also she's actually helping out Telemachus for the most part in the start of this narrative. She's helping Telemachus, who really is a grounding point at the beginning of the story. Telemachus, Odysseus' son, is coming to terms with the fact that Ithaca and his palace, the royal palace where Odysseus is is still the king, but he's absent, is becoming overrun with the suitors who are saying, Odysseus is gone, Penelope, you should marry one of us, decide to marry one of us. And she is kind of trying her best to delay this, and it puts Telemachus in a very precarious position. There's also a mirror in regards that's mentioned quite early on, and it's repeated later throughout the Odyssey. There's a mirror in regards to Agamemnon's fate, in that when he returns from the Trojan War, his wife married, I believe it was Aegisthus. His wife married someone, let's say, and his wife, I've written this down, Clytemnestra. So I've heard of Agamemnon, but Clytemnestra and Aegisthus, they collude together to murder Agamemnon when he comes back. And that fate itself for Agamemnon, it seems to psychologically, Odysseus seems to be fearful that a similar fate may befall him, that he may return and his wife may be married and she may collude to murder him. At least that I get that sense that is being subtly, there's kind of a subtext in that is of as to whether my wife will continue to be faithful. The discussion in regards to gender dynamics, slavery, and all of those things, those are a hot topic in regards to the translations, especially in regards to the Emily Wilson translation, but I'm not going to go into detail in regards to that. This translation is, for the most part, quite, for lack of a better word, masculine, immediate translation. Okay, so Odysseus, he's wily, he's clever, he's cunning. It's him who came up with the idea, and he commanded the idea to use the Trojan horse to enter into Troy. But yeah, Poseidon doesn't like him. Poseidon's not a fan of him, and Athena tries to help him out as best she can. The beginning of the narrative is very much Telemachus, and Telemachus is trying to sort of figure out whether his father really has passed. He's also trying to live up to his father's almost demigod stature. And there are questions as to whether he actually really is the son of Odysseus. Does he really have it in him? Does he really have Odysseus's hero blood in him? So those are the first few books, and then it transitions to Odysseus and what he is going through. And even when Odysseus, it goes to, let's say, the present tense with Odysseus, if we call this the present tense, he eventually escapes Circe's island. Doesn't escape it, actually, she helps him to get out, and she gets convinced by, I think it's Hermes or Athena, maybe it's both of them. Hermes or Athena convince Circe to let Odysseus go. Odysseus ends up going to different little chiefdoms, areas, and he has to recount his story back as to how he got to the point where he got stranded in on Circe's island. And you come to learn a bit about Odysseus's crew, how they kind of abandoned him and they were a bit cowardly. You learn about the stories of the lotus eaters, people who went to an island and they ate lotuses and they essentially forget about everything else and they become addicted to just eating lotuses and being a bit senseless on the island. And then Odysseus, after recounting his stories with people, and he's regarded with a little bit of suspicion, but they also recognize that he is someone that is great, that is a hero, that is strong. after he starts to constantly explain his stories to various chieftains and people, you start to piece this narrative together. And I believe the second half of the Odyssey starts to really the past and Odysseus's recollections of how he got to his current predicament start to lessen, and they start to diminish, and it starts to be much more about the immediate present and what Odysseus is doing now to reach Ithaca. There's also quite a interesting, spooky, and haunting passage in which Odysseus goes to the house of Hades, so the underworld, and he has conversations with various ghosts, ghosts that he knows, the ghost of his mother, ghosts of people who even died quite recently in the narrative, people who died in the Trojan War, such as Achilles. And that was kind of an interesting book as well. But that's essentially the first 12 books of the Odyssey. I would say it is a pretty dense read. It's something that I feel like shouldn't necessarily be read. It should be read out loud. There were many times where I felt like I have to read this passage out loud. And even in reading out loud, in it being a prose narrative, I did feel like there was definitely that poetic element that still couldn't fully get dissolved. There was still this sense of rhythm, even in Lawrence's translation. That being said, this is not a very popular translation. I can't say that I would completely recommend it. However, it probably is a good translation for people who are looking to read it not as much as a prose narrative, but perhaps a bit more like a historical historical narrative. In my opinion, it's just in reading historical texts such as the sagas. I do like reading the sagas kind of when they're written in prose. Most of them are written in prose. That's how they were produced. However, I feel like that it lends a bit better to it being read in that way. That's just for me in assessing them, in sort of analyzing the text. So I think if you want that angle perhaps for the Odyssey, this translation might be worthwhile. But most people would probably feel like there's something missing if they don't have it written in a poetic meter. But that's the Odyssey books 1 to 12. In the future, I probably will make another video finishing up this book. Hopefully, I think I will get to finishing it, but there are quite a few other books that I'm reading. But that's the discussion. Have you read this version of the Odyssey? What version have you read? What did you think of it? Take care.